Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really wild idea, one that could totally flip our understanding of, well, everything, from how memory works to the very laws of physics.
So let's get right into it. We're looking at a pretty radical hypothesis from a biologist named Rupert Sheldrake. And what he's proposing, it basically goes against one of the biggest, most basic assumptions in all of modern science. You know, the idea that the laws of nature are set in stone, that they've been the same since the Big Bang. Well, Sheldrake says, maybe not.
The core of his whole theory boils down to one simple but huge claim. The universe has a memory. So, yeah, let's unpack what that actually means.
Okay, so Sheldrake gives it this name, morphic resonance. The basic idea is that memory isn't just in our heads. It's like woven into the fabric of nature itself. Think about it this way. Similar things, and I mean anything from atoms to animals, they influence each other. Not physically, but across time and space. It's kind of like when you strike a tuning fork and another one across the room starts vibrating with it, even though they never touched. It's a resonance.
Now, you can probably see how this just completely clashes with a core belief in science, right? For centuries, the conventional view has been that the universe runs on these fixed eternal laws of physics. Sheldrake's idea is totally different. He's suggesting the universe doesn't have fixed laws, but more like evolving habits. The more something happens, the easier it is for it to happen again, everywhere.
Okay, but look, for any scientific theory to be more than just a cool idea, it has to be testable, right? It needs to make predictions we can actually check. So if nature really does form habits, where on Earth would we see the evidence for that? Well, let's start with chemistry. According to the theory, if you create a brand new chemical, making it form a crystal for the very first time should be really hard. But once you've done it, a habit has been formed. And that should make it easier for every other chemist all around the world to do the same thing. And the crazy part? This is actually something chemists have been talking about for years, just as a weird little quirk of their work.
And this isn't just some abstract lab curiosity either. It has huge real-world consequences. I mean, take the story of the AIDS drug Rativanavir. For 2 years, everything was fine. The company was making it successfully. Then, all of a sudden, in 1998, a totally new and totally unwanted crystal form starts showing up. And not just in one factory, but everywhere, all at once. This new crystal wouldn't dissolve right, which made the drug completely useless. They had to pull it from the market, a massive, costly disaster.
So what's the conventional explanation for something like that? It's called unintentional seeding. The idea is that tiny, microscopic dust particles of the new crystal must have traveled on the wind all around the globe, seeding the new batches. The only problem? No one has ever actually found these tiny traveling seeds. Morphic resonance, on the other hand, has a different take. A new habit just formed in nature. It created this invisible field that made the new crystal form pop up everywhere.
And look, it's not just Sheldrake saying this is weird. Even the top experts in the field, guys like Joel Bernstein, admit that this whole phenomenon of disappearing polymorphs is, well, it's a huge puzzle. It's really hard to explain using our standard scientific models.
All right, so the story doesn't end with crystals. The theory also makes some interesting predictions about other physical stuff, like melting points. And then it gets even crazier, because it scales all the way up from simple chemistry to the complex world of biology.
Think about it. If a chemical's habit gets stronger, it should get more stable, right? And a more stable crystal should have a higher melting point. Well, Sheldrake looked at the data, and it seems like that's exactly what's happening. For natural chemicals that have been around forever, like salicin from willow bark, nothing changes. Their habits are ancient and stable. But for newer, man-made chemicals like aspirin, it's like they're still learning how to be a crystal. Their melting points have actually been creeping up over the last century as their habits get stronger.
Okay, so here's where the theory takes a really big leap. It suggests this whole habit field idea doesn't just apply to molecules. What if it also applies to learned behaviors in animals, in entire species? And there's actually some pretty wild historical evidence for this. And it comes from a really unexpected place. Pavlov, the famous conditioning guy. So, in his experiments with mice, the first generation took around 300 tries to learn a task. But get this, by the fourth generation, they were nailing it in just 10 trials. That is a huge jump in learning speed, way faster than you could ever explain with regular genetics. And this next part, this is maybe the most mind-bending piece of evidence. So there were these famous experiments where rats at Harvard learned to escape a water maze, and as you'd expect, each generation got faster. But here's the kicker. rats of the same breed over in Scotland and Australia, they also started getting faster at the same rate. They were starting off at the level the Harvard rats had already achieved. It's as if the memory wasn't just being passed down from parent to kid, but was somehow becoming available to their entire species at once.
So naturally, you have to ask, what about us? What about humans? Could this idea of a collective habit-forming memory apply to our own learning and our own culture?
Just look down at your keyboard for a second. That QWERTY layout, it's famously terrible, right? It was designed to slow down old mechanical typewriters so they wouldn't jam. But here's the weird thing. When engineers tried to introduce better, more logical keyboard layouts, people actually learned the bad QWERTY layout faster. From a morphic resonance point of view, that makes perfect sense. There's this massive habit field built up by the billions of people who've already learned to type on it.
And how about this one? The Flynn effect. It's this super well-documented but really puzzling fact that global IQ scores went up by like 30% over the 20th century. It's not that we all suddenly got 30% smarter. The morphic resonance explanation? As millions and millions of people took these tests, a collective habit formed, making the puzzles themselves easier to solve for everyone who came after.
You know, this lines up really nicely with a giant puzzle in modern genetics called the missing heritability problem. Basically, now that we've mapped the human genome, scientists have realized that our genes, they just don't explain everything. For something as simple as height, for instance, DNA can only account for about a third of why it's passed down. That means almost 65% of inheritance is a total mystery. It really suggests something else must be going on.
Okay, so all of this has been building up to what is, without a doubt, the most profound and, the most controversial part of this whole theory. It forces us to completely rethink where our own memories actually are.
I mean, ask anyone where your memory is stored, and they'll say, duh, in the brain. But here's the thing. For more than 100 years, neuroscientists have been searching for the physical memory trace, the little bit of brain stuff that holds a specific memory. And you know what? They've never, ever found it.
So the standard view is that the brain is like a computer hard drive, right? It records and stores memories. But the morphic resonance view suggests something else entirely. Imagine the brain isn't a hard drive. It's a TV set. The show isn't in the television, the TV just tunes into the broadcast signal. In this model, our brain tunes into our own past. And if you damage the brain, you might break the tuner, but you haven't actually erased the broadcast itself. And this isn't some new, fringe frustration. I mean, way back in 1950, one of the top neuroscientists of his time, Carl Lashley, basically threw up his hands after years of searching. He said it seemed like memory was somehow everywhere and nowhere in the brain at the same time.
So what does that mean for you and your memories? Well, it suggests that your personal memory is just a really, really specific case of this universal resonance. The reason you remember your own past so clearly is because you are more similar to yourself yesterday than you are to anyone else. Your brain is just perfectly tuned to the broadcast of, well, you.
So in the end, morphic resonance is still a really controversial idea, but it is a testable one. It challenges us to see the universe not as some clockwork machine running on fixed laws, but more like a living, growing thing with a developing memory. And it leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. If our brains really are more like receivers than recorders, what else are we tuning into?